had that gang banging like we did. It wouldn't have been that bad because the baby boomers would have been at work. They were not at work. They were at work in their particular occupations, not paying attention to their community. They were not paying attention to it. Not enough. Because I mean, if you really look at the programs and the things that's going on, if you really look at it, right, it's like it's from the 80s. Look at all these programs. It's like you got advanced everything else, but when it comes to the black community and progressive programs, it's like 1982. Am I right or wrong? And everybody got all the reasons and excuses for why it's like that, but everything else is advanced. All the military is advanced. All these other institutions advanced. Technologies advanced. All this money spent on technologies. Why don't you try pulling the other race that you kept in poverty this whole time out before you build new stuff? Hey, that stuff can get put on the back burner. A new gadget, new robots can get put on the back burner. Nobody should be talking about AI, artificial intelligence, when you have black people in the ghetto. Who cares? In other words, with the baby boomers being at fault, America has had its priorities out of place concerning the progression of the black community. And the baby boomers also, again, are at fault the most concerning this. Okay? You got all the science in the world. You understand all things. But you can't understand how everybody else is out a poverty experience except for African Americans. The Chinese got Chinatown. The Mexicans all don't live in poverty. And white people definitely all don't live in poverty. So what's the excuse? I'm gonna say, what's the reason? The reason is no one decided to take and bring about real progression and stop playing. They've been playing and playing you. Again, they've been playing and playing you, pimping you every 4 years to 8 years, however long the present president has the White House. They telling you they're gonna do this, they're telling you they're gonna do that. You can count on both hands how many things they promise you. It's like they can't be sophisticated. It's like they have two big bills, 2 to 5 big bills that they're gonna pass, and they ain't talking about nothing else. Every administration should be very concerned, and if they had a heart to pull a people that built this country on their backs out of a poverty experience in this country. They still haven't done it, and they still got all the reasons, explanations for why they ain't done it. And like I said, the main generation that's responsible is the baby boomers. I didn't make it up. Go look at the history. I'm not picking on them. Go look at the history. Go look at the history. I'm not picking on them. If you look at the baby boomers' history, I think it starts at the 1960s and all that. Go look from the 1960s on and beyond. Go look at that generation. Man, they were partying. They were doing everything because America was constantly progressing as far as technology and as an institution, and their institutions were progressing. So with that being said, America was being introduced to all different types of technologies, gadgets, HBO, all different types of things and drugs and everything. And then black and whites were getting together. So it was just everybody was caught in a whirlwind. And in that whirlwind, they neglected passing legacies on to new generations. And that's how it happened. And I'm not rubbing people's nose or anything. I'm going back to history, and I'm showing you, because everybody wants somebody to blame, but everybody don't want to face the truth. Yeah, everybody wants to blame someone. You want to blame someone for why all this is happening, but when I show you the truth, what you can't deny, Now everybody get quiet. You hear crickets. So you really didn't want to know the truth. I'm showing you. What other generation is most responsible? What generation had the most pivotal turn or potential to change things in this country? It was the baby boomers. It ain't Generation X. We had the most power to change things. And I came along in 1981. That part. That part. By the time I was 10, it was the 90s. That part. That part. So how we had the potential, and here I am in the 90s just getting 10 years old. It was the baby boomers that had the power. They was the ones that was the parents through the 80s and the 90s. Through the 70s and all of that. They were the ones, the baby boomers and their parents, I would say both collectively, were the two generations that failed us the most. Now, when you talk about the black experience, the generation before the parents of the baby boomers, they didn't even have a chance. It was just too much racism. I'm talking about the grandparents of the baby boomers. The grandparents of the baby boomers, even the white people, they couldn't do nothing. It was just the racism was too thick. And for baby boomers' grandparents, their grandparents were too submitted to white America. They couldn't do nothing. But by the time the baby boomers came along, the blacks and whites were now interacting. You see where I'm going with this? They were interacting, which now, okay, let's put our minds together. Let's do this, let's do that. You see what I'm saying? Let's do all of this culturally. There was no other generations could have done it before the baby boomers because it was just too much bondage. It was too much hate and racism, and it was how it was, and the police allowed it, the government institutions allowed it, and the grandparents of the baby boomers could do nothing on the white side or the black side. So what we talking about? We got to be talking about generations after the thick of severe racism. In the generation after the thick of severe racism was the baby boomers, and it still was going on a little bit, but they had the potential to change it, and they did not. And when they did learn something, they hoarded it to themselves, like I said. I'm showing you where the mistakes are, because you definitely can't blame Generation X because we were too late coming along. If I was 10 in 1991, you do the math on that. I was 20 in 2001. That's how you know I'm young. I was 20 in 2001. 20 on the dot. I was 20 in 2001. So I wasn't in my 20s in the 90s. I represent Generation X. I wasn't in my 20s in the 90s. I was in my 20s in the millennium. My first year of being 20, I was in the millennium. Okay? So somebody that comes along in the millennium at 20, what I was supposed to be doing before 20? That part, which was 2021. 2001. So what does that tell you? It was my parents, the baby boomers generation that was supposed to be doing something in the 90s and the 80s. And before that was the 70s and 60s, which means the parents of the baby boomers were supposed to be doing something too. So those two generations right there, particularly, because if you look at like I said, before the grandparents of the baby boomers, whether they were black or white, they had no chance to change anything because hate was so thick. What you gonna change? So then if we're breaking it down to generations, you would have to conclude that it would be the generations after severe racism, the first direct generation. And that would be the grandparents of the baby boomers, the generation before the baby boomers, and the baby boomers themselves. They were the only two generations that could have had any kind of change. Before that, there was no possibility because the racism was just too thick in all the institutions of America. In other words, the American government was just two races. The American institutions under them or within them were two races. Police were two races. Governors and mayors, they had racism. All these politicians had racism. So who had the potential to change things and get the ball rolling and get a new community for the African American community? That was the generation before the baby boomers and the baby boomers themselves. Now you need to realize that because you think I'm picking on a certain generation, but I'm showing you they were the only generation right after racism. After severe racism, they were the first generation. The baby boomers was the first, I would say, the first generation that was after severe racism. So you need to hit the ground running, and you didn't realize that, and you had time to realize it when you were interacting with each other. You were working with each other. You was in the military. Why do you think, hey, we need to get something going? You can't look and always say it's faith, faith, faith. This is how it's, no, and no again. Sometimes people made bad decisions, and we can't chalk it off all the time as fate. And the people in this country that made the worst mistakes were the baby boomers and the generation before them. Because here's the thing, with the generation before the baby boomers, they had the money, that part. So the baby boomers could put in the work and the groundwork while the parents would would make it work out. So now let me say this again, because I think I said something wrong when I said grandparents. Generation X grandparents was the generation before the baby boomers. So our grandparents is as far as it could have went. But you still understand what I was saying, because I said the generation baby boomer and their parents. I made that clear. Okay? The generation before, obviously, baby boomers were my grandparents. So our grandparents and our parents, if you will, speaking for generations, were the ones that were supposed to change this country. Not me. Not me. When I was 20 in 2001, it's already too late. You had a whole decade of gangbanging in the 90s, all across the country, not just California. I ain't picking on California, it was everywhere. Because then you had the wannabes and everybody wanted to be in it. Everybody did. Everybody wanted to be in something, one of them gangs in the 90s. Okay? So when you look at this, you have to conclude and put the fault where it belongs. You have to understand history. That's why I don't take any games for anyone that doesn't understand history, or you have not even been in the history. I don't play with people like that, because you don't even understand what I'm talking about right now. You don't. You can have the capacity to understand what I'm talking about, but in all actuality, you really wasn't a part of that experience. You wasn't really people that had the potential to change these things. So that's why people like me find it so offensive, because you really don't know what this history is. You really don't know what this is in America. You think you do. You see this little stuff, but you can't rattle off this information like what I'm telling you. The baby boomers and the generation before the baby boomers. You don't even know nothing about that. Now, some of you do that are cultured, but I'm talking for the bulk of the people. I can't address special people. I can't address people just that did educate themselves when the bulk of the people didn't. And you're younger than me. So you obviously are not part of the show. You're here, but you're not part of the show. I'm talking about, and I got to keep it 100. I'm talking about baby boomers that are black and white. Baby boomers that are black and white in America had the power to change things more than any other races. The problem is as we're coming to the end of times, faults are being placed in where they should be placed. We're seeing the history as time goes by. That's what happens. Now you see who really failed you. Now you see where things really went wrong. And you can't do that if you haven't really been here. And your parents wasn't here. And so on and so on. You can't really say that. And if you speak for, oh well, my parents went to the military, this, that, but I'm talking about the bulk of the whole situation. Okay? And I can't put you and place you in this situation when for the most part you wasn't really in a situation. That's the best way I could put it. So then you get offense when you play around and play games because you don't know what you're playing with. You don't know the history you're playing with in the wars that's been going on, in the failures and all of that that's been going on. So then you're just jumping in it for the sake of jumping in it because you're here. And that's not allowed for a person like me. That's not allowed. Okay? And that's what you need to know about me. I look young, but this is where I'm at. Okay? That's for people that's younger than me. You're 20, 30. Look, I don't have a problem with Pat. The difference between the generation that were before me, I don't have a problem with passing legacies and passing torches. But you can't come acting like you're in the same position. You can't become a student unless you are a student. You can't act like you a teacher and you're younger than me. You're not a teacher. I don't care what kind of gifts you have. That's not going to be sufficient. Your spiritual gifts are not going to be sufficient with being a part of this experience in America. A part of what has been going on with your grandparents and your forefathers and ancestors not being connected to that experience. It's not going to be sufficient. You have spiritual gifts and street knowledge. You got street wisdom and you think that's sufficient. It's not sufficient. We're talking about wars here. We're talking about real faults and real history. And if you're not a part of those experiences, for the most part, then you have to become a student first. You can't come up here like a teacher. And that needed to be said so you can understand. Okay? It's one thing to talk about equality. It's one thing to talk about being involved in history, being involved in the real wars. That's real. I can't make you part of the history if you wasn't. For the most part, I can't make you part of that if you were not part of that. That's out of my hands. You see what I'm saying? And that's what's going on here. It's nothing but old wars in influence and new wars influenced by old wars. And these new wars are influenced by old wars. So if you're not aware of the old wars and the connection and all the history of it, then you're out of pocket. That's what the new generation would say. You're out of pocket. You don't fit. And that's why I tell people to stay out of it. Because your ancestors are not, for the most part, for the boat part, not incorporated into this, what I'm talking about. I needed to say that. Now, back to the old lion versus the young lion. In this context, when I say this, the old lions are the baby boomers. That's the main generation. And the young lions are Generation X or younger. The young lions are Generation X or younger. Okay? So, here's the thing. Now, here's what really inspired this message. Not only did the baby boomers fail this country, but they failed Generation X, which I kind of touched on a little bit. But then it becomes like this thing where we owe them respect. Like I owe Generation baby boomers respect with all I've just said. With all I just said. With all the failures. No, you have to individualize it. You have to individualize it. collectively speaking, they did a lot of things, but they failed. It almost was totally in vain. As far as the black community, look at it for what it is. What did they actually do? They set up programs in the 80s, food stamps, tangible food stamps. I remember my parents had real food stamps. It wasn't a card. It was not a card. It was like cash food stamps. It was currency, tangible dollar like food stamps. You took them into stores. You had government cheese, big blocks of cheese. You had the what we call the the Christmas borough. That's what we called it. Where if your parents is on food stamps, they can give you a certain amount of money to get Christmas toys. All they did was a whole bunch of little programs with, hear this part real good. All they did was a whole bunch of little programs that never was sufficient with being progressive for the overall pulling of African Americans out of the ghetto community experience. See, what y'all think is it's impossible for the ghetto, for African Americans to come out the ghetto. How is it impossible when Mexican Americans are doing it? They're doing it. It's not just a work ethic, guys. It's not just a work ethic that gets this done. Again, it is not just a work ethic to get this done. The American community is helping their community, right or wrong. Then why they don't go to the ghetto when they come here and they coming straight from another country? Why they don't go to the black ghettos? That would be the most easy place to get up on your feet. You can't go to Hollywood. So what do they do then? They go to neighborhoods, Mexicans that come from Mexico. They come to neighborhoods that's already established with the help of the American government. So why can't the black community get the help of the American government and have their own communities outside of poverty? Explain that to me. When you got Mexicans doing it. I'm giving you a perfect example. Why you think it's impossible for the ghetto to not be anymore. Like this has it how it has to be. Then why it isn't how it has to be for Mexicans? Why isn't it how it has to be for Chinese? They got Chinatowns. You was the one that built this country up. Not the Chinese. The Chinese were not out there building a country up. So then why aren't you number one as far as our to get a whole neighborhood, a whole community outside of a poverty neighborhood? Why aren't you number one now that America's successful for being on the list, for being a batter up or runner up for having for receiving a community outside of poverty? You should have been that community, but the baby boomers failed you, and that's why you're not. It shouldn't have been anyone else. It shouldn't have been anyone else based on good ethics and based on good morals. It shouldn't have, and based on respect. But you didn't realize it. You know why you didn't realize it? Because a lot of the baby boomers were either too busy partying or too busy trying to go over and work with the white man's cause. They worked with the white man's cause. So you wasn't focused on the black community cause. That's what I'm saying. And there's no denying that. This is the generation that had the power to change it. This is the baby boomer and their parents, which is Generation X's grandparents, were the only one, they were the most pivotal generations in America as far as African American progression and the overall American experience. For there to be some real change. And you have to accept this as facts. This is in my opinion. How is it in my opinion when I'm showing you history? I'm showing you history. So how's it in my opinion? Any other generation could have did it? I showed you that. They couldn't have. Generations before baby boomers, before their parents, before the baby boomers' parents, which would be the baby boomers' grandparents on both sides, black and white, they had no power to change this stuff going on. Baby boomers' grandparents had no power to change it. It was too much going on. It was too much racism. It was too much hate. It was too much crazy people out here. And so you can't say they could have changed it. So you gotta, hold that thought. Nobody before the baby boomers and their parents could have changed it. Let that resonate. Why you thinking you don't know, you don't have a sense of direction? I'm showing you the sense of direction. I'm showing you where you need to be directed to show you who is to blame. Okay, you couldn't have changed it before racism. Granted, right? Too much racism in the government, police, all these institutions. Black people wasn't rising up trying to do nothing. They was too submitted. So the first potential in American history for this country to begin to progress, the African American experience and the overall American experience, was the baby boomers and their parents. Now, so how is that a matter of opinion when I showed you that the parents, the generation before the baby boomers' parents, could do nothing? So how is that a form of opinion when that's facts? Because of all this racism that was in the government, the police, and everywhere. So that's facts, right? It's an educated assumption that black or white people could do nothing before the baby boomers' parents' generation. They could do nothing. That's an educated guess, right? Based on all this that has happened. This is an educated guess. True enough, right? Okay, then. So then we got to put the blame on the people that had the power to do it and change these things. And the first two generations were the baby boomers' parents and the baby boomers themselves. That was the first two generations, and they did they did what they did, but how they wanted to do it. They didn't focus on racial progression. Black and white getting along, literally, financially, in every way. You know what the money was like back then? I'm talking about working, the minimum wage and all that. $7 here, $6 there. $6 and $7. Lower than that, some places. $5. You go to work and you're only making what? $40. Man, come on, man. That's what I'm saying. And they was the only those were the two generations that had the power. And then here's the punchline. This is what this whole video is about. Then when you get somebody like me that rises up and has the power, now the baby boomers want respect. Now the baby boomers are condescending, like, hey, don't you remember me? No, I don't remember you. I don't remember any. In fact, I personally feel you failed us as a generation. Now you rise up in the ranks and you become who you supposed to be becoming. I'm talking about Generation X. You become what you're supposed to be becoming, and now the baby boomers want some type of respect that they think they're entitled to. Why? Because you was on top just a little while ago? Well, that's not you anymore. And that's where we get the dilemma. You know where I read a quote from? Old men start wars and young men finish them. Old men start wars and young men finish the wars. Because the old men feel like they're entitled. They feel like they're entitled to certain things that they have, in this country particularly, they have not earned. In other words, you haven't really earned, baby boomers, the respect of Generation X. Not a lot. If you educated, I don't see how you can respect them really. On an individual basis, but not on a collective a baby boomers generation. You can't. It's how. When you really look at stuff for what it is and what it was, how can you respect them? Then you, collectively speaking. Now, individuals, you got a lot of good individuals out there. You got a lot of individuals, in every situation. But But let's keep it 100. Those are the two generations that had the power to change things. And you can say, well, you don't have any idea what they did. But I have an idea of what they did not do. And they did not progress the African American experience while other ethnicities are progressing. That's all I need to know. They're progressing. Why couldn't you do it there then? Why couldn't you? So collectively, it's safe to say, you know, you failed. You know, and look, there's no one else to blame. You're gonna blame me? I'm from Generation X. Yeah, people used to say that all in the 90s. Generation X, Generation X. They're this, they're that. They're bad. But in reality, man, baby boomers failed Generation X. And now they're looking around, driving around, whether it be military or some other institution in the government, all these baby boomers riding around like you're entitled to some type of respect that you really don't deserve. Not from the likes of me. Man, I'm the child of baby boomers. I come that generation, whether it was culturally speaking or is it our family, that's the generation that was over me. You see where I'm going with this? And look, what did they do? That's what I'm saying. And that's what you got to look at. And you could, like I said earlier in the other video, you can have great parents, but that does not speak for generation baby boomer. Look at them collectively. That's what I'm trying to show you. Look at them collectively. And now you will see what I'm saying. I'm not picking on them. They had the greatest potential, and with all they did,